Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
Hey, John, thanks for sitting down with me. I certainly appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
So for our audience who don't know about you, you actually have two different businesses, SilverTree Systems and then Work Relay. Can you give a quick overview of what those two businesses do?
Sure. SilverTree Systems is a consulting company. We do a lot of custom work for some big companies, DocuSign, Adobe. We've been doing that for quite a long time now. We became a Salesforce partner back in 2006-ish, so we've been doing it for a long time. And we decided in about 2012 to start a product on the Salesforce platform. We believe we had an idea that filled a need in the marketplace, so we decided to build it. So we've built it now over a 7-year period, and implemented across many different industries. So it's been very, very positive for us.
So that's Work Relay.
Yeah.
And what does Work Relay do?
So Work Relay is like a business process management system / project management system. So the way we look at it is work, and it doesn't matter whether it's a project or a process or anything like that. Because at the end of the day, a project is simply a bunch of processes, predecessors, successors. So we said, there's just work, right? And if you want to use that work as standalone, if you want to use it as a part of a process, if you want to use it as a task in a project, it doesn't matter. It's just work, right? So that's kind of how we built the product. So it's very different from the typical, process and project management tools out there that kind of focus just on one aspect of those two together. And we found that initially it was hard to get people to understand that, hey, you can have these two things together and they work great together. But over the last year or so, we're starting to see a lot more people saying, hey, you know what? We have time-sensitive processes that we want to manage like projects, and it seems like you guys can do that. So that's been our big thing.
Makes sense. So it has a combination of both process as well as different tasks and all combined into one, so they don't have to go check in a procedure manual to check how to do a specific task.
Well, also, a lot of companies, we worked with one company where they're a clinical trials research company, so they do all these clinical trials for the big pharmaceuticals. And they would map out their processes, very complex processes. The projects go on for years. And they would kind of go through it. They would go through it with their customers. And then they had to translate that process into a project management system. And as soon as they did that, obviously it was out of date because you're going to make changes. So with ours, it doesn't matter where you make the changes. You can make changes through the process design interface, or you can make it through the project management, the Gantt chart, anything like that, it doesn't matter. So, for a lot of companies that have complex processes, but they're time sensitive, they need to be scheduled, all that kind of stuff, then that's really our sweet spot.
Most certainly. And you're a king when it comes to project and process management, that you've written a book about it.
Correct.
It's also available on Amazon. Can you share a little bit about kind of the concept behind the book?
We often use the words complex and complicated in the same sense, right? But actually, there is a significant difference. Something that is complicated is like you're building an airplane, right? You can figure it out. You get the right people involved. You can, it'll be done in a certain way, and this is kind of how it works. Something that's complex is not. You can't lay it out in the beginning. You might know where you want to go, but there's so many variables, so many complex variables, that you don't have an easy way to basically say, okay, this is the plan, this is what we're going to follow. So in a project management setting, the idea that, depending on the project, obviously, but the idea that you can plan out till 2 years out, with all the tasks and things like that in a more volatile environment, just doesn't make any sense. So if you look at it as a complex adaptive system, rather, then you can use some of the ideas behind the science of complexity to help you manage your projects. So that's kind of what the book's about.
Makes sense. So if it's like let's say if it's a service company that's delivering a fairly complicated service because it requires people with good intellect to understand the business needs and kind of not just follow a procedure, but also have to think for the client, right? So in that instance, how would that play out? Let's just say if someone is offering like a marketing service or doing some sort of a consultative service offering. Because we do SEO, paid search, social ad, HubSpot campaigns, all those different things. And it's not just, even though it's probably doing the same thing as that HubSpot, I have to think what I would do for Work Relay is not the same that what I would do for another client. You kind of have to think uniquely for that particular client, what would make sense, right? Because the tool can have so many flexibilities on what you do, but how do you better use it, right? So that's why I was thinking, what I do, is it complicated or is it complex?
I think the kinds of things that you would do are complicated.
Okay.
Because you know the stages that you have to go through, you know pretty much how long they're going to take. You don't have a lot of shared resources that you have to spread amongst many different projects. So that would be a typical kind of a project, right? Where it becomes complex is where you have many more variables, right? So you don't really know at the time that you start exactly what has to be done. So and as it progresses, especially if it's a multi-year project, it gets more and more complicated because you have to find the right things, the right people at the right time, all of those kinds of things. And so in those cases, you would take a different approach. Instead of trying to map out the plan as a schedule, you just map it out as a set of tasks that need to be done without having to put in scheduling and maintaining scheduling. And you can use something called buffer management, which is a way to kind of give you an early warning if your project's going to go off the rails or not. So the whole idea there is because you can't, in a complicated situation, you know when you're behind because you've got it all mapped out and you've got the schedule and all this kind of stuff. In a complex project, you don't know. You don't know what tasks are going to have to be done when, but you've got kind of guidelines as to when things have to be done. So you try and manage to that milestone, for example, and has a buffer in it if there are any problems, down the line, or there's a lot of changes that take place. But you can see after, how much of this that I know I have to do has been done versus how much buffer do I have left. And if you don't have, if they're not kind of together, then you're likely to miss your dates.
Understood. Yeah, that's an interesting concept. Yeah, so it's a great way to kind of simplify the complexity to be able to tackle bigger challenges.
Right. Instead of spending all that time on doing scheduling and that type of thing, you just basically say, here are the tasks that need to get done. Let's prioritize them. And it'll get done when it gets done.
Makes sense. Obviously, with the emergence of AI and machine learning, all those different things that are coming into almost every industry and disrupting things that we didn't even anticipate ever happening, how do you see those things kind of affecting the overall project management space?
Right. So a lot of the projects that we deal with are really complex. Right. So they're different every time they're executed, but there are patterns. Right. I mean, if you had enough data, you could analyze the pattern and say, hey, if it's this kind, if this is what the project looks like, the things that have to be done. We've got experience in this. This is the likely way. This is the likely task that they're going to need. This is the likely, whatever. So I see AI as being a great way to look for those patterns and try and turn it more into a complicated scenario rather than a complex scenario. So just by kind of watching the patterns and being able to say, look, we're pretty sure this is how it's going to run. But you have to have a lot of data to make that happen. And that's one of the problems with AI is you need a lot of data.
Yeah.
And in project management, the question is there enough data to be able to actually work with and come up with some good, AI type things.
Makes sense. And oftentimes, I think even just having AI to support certain tasks and maybe even eliminating certain things because you can have machine telling you like, hey, this task is no longer required because you solved this problem earlier in the process or things of that nature. So as opposed to creating manual tasks and things of that nature.
Right, exactly.
Interesting. Obviously, before you got into the entrepreneurial world, you were in the corporate place. You worked for IBM in South Africa. And then when did you make that switch from being big in the corporate space to actually being an entrepreneur?
Well, I worked in IBM South Africa until 1985, and then I came out here. It was actually the last year that IBM did really well. So I always think that because I left, that's why they kind of went downhill. So when I got here, I worked for a consulting company, and then I decided, in the early 90s to go out and do my own thing. And it was quite a switch.
Were there any kind of limiting beliefs or anything you had about the entrepreneurial life?
It's funny, I'm very bad with financial stuff. I can't even read a financial statement. My entire philosophy for building a business was more money has to come in than goes out. That's it, right? If I don't have more money coming in than going out, I got a problem. Other than that, I'm happy. So it works well for me.
So obviously, being in the business and also, like working on the business or working in the business is two different concepts, right? And when you're an entrepreneur trying to build a business, and obviously you've been at it over 20 years now, and you have successfully built a SaaS product and as well as a service and consulting company. So you know a thing or two about building a business. So how do you, as a business leader, kind of balance the act of working in the business versus working on the business?
So I try and spend as much time as possible with existing clients because I feel that you have to make sure that the clients that you have already are happy, and that your product is developing in the way that makes sense for them. Try and get their input, and then only based on that. That's the kind of the number one thing, right? If you've got the clients, make sure that you keep the clients, right, and see if you can grow the clients and all those kinds of things, and then you can sort of go out and what we've tried to do is every client that we've had, we've tried to kind of look at where they are in the market, what do they do, and then try to find similar companies so that we can go and say, we did this with this company, it's similar to your company, we think this might be a good solution for you, and that's been a major kind of direction that we've gone in. So
you're able to kind of get that first-hand data from your customer and their frustrations or happiness, and then figure out how do you the product roadmap or even the direction of a company, as far as how you would kind of roll out new features or even new products in the future.
Right. So just learning how that company, what issues do they have, and how are they solving them. If we can take that knowledge and apply it to similar businesses, then we have a much better shot at getting the deal.
Most certainly. So you've been at it for close to 20-something years. What are some of the lessons you learned in the process?
The biggest lesson I learned on the SilverTree side is don't do work for startups when they don't have all the funding that they need. So this has been a huge thing for us because we love startups. It's great. We in the beginning, and then you find, this has happened so many times, where they kind of run out of money, right? They run out of funding, and they say, it's coming. Don't worry about it, it's coming. We keep on working. After like the fourth month, we haven't got paid, and then you're like, guys, come on. It's like ridiculous. And I always think, I've learned my lesson, I'm not going to do that again, but I always do it. So to me, if you're working with a startup, the best way to do it, and really the only way to do it, is to do it on a retainer basis. Get paid at the beginning of the month, not at the end of the month, so that you're never going to be out of money, because you just don't know when they're going to fold, or all sorts of bad things can happen. And you can lose a lot of money for sure.
Most certainly.
So that was a kind of a big thing for us. The other one is just partnerships, right? Finding partners who you can work with, that'll both bring you business, but also kind of help you in defining whatever the marketplace, depending on what the partner is, doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, especially you built a business on the Salesforce platform.
Right.
Salesforce built their business on a partnership model.
Absolutely.
And almost everybody that is trying to get into either some sort of a sales or a project manager or an operation product, they always want to figure out how do I play in the ecosystem of Salesforce.
Exactly.
And now you have HubSpot is also kind of trying to do the very same thing.
Yeah,
They're building a platform.
Yeah.
And they built a hub, and it's essentially the sales, marketing, the service side, and then they also have all this partner network. And I've heard someone also tell me that they said when you're trying to grow your business, you look at the people around you and say, who has my customer?
Right.
And how do I make friends with that guy who has my customer? And then both parties benefit by having a strategic partnership that's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great multiplier. If you can find the right partner, then you can really kind of
scale from there.
Yeah.
Any failure that comes to mind that
besides the startups?
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem that we had when we built the product is that we didn't use the idea of a MVP to go out and then start building from there. Just by circumstances, we started out and we worked with a very large, the CRO I was talking about, and they had very complex needs. So we did the reverse. We started with the hardest part, and then we went to the less hard part, instead of doing it the other way around. But it was a very expensive way to do it. So I wouldn't recommend that to anybody for sure. You want to start with the smallest product you can get out there, get people on it, and grow from there, rather than trying to build this massive thing and thinking that if you build it, they'll come kind of thing. It doesn't work so well.
So making the minimum viable product, see if there is a customer market fit, product market fit, and then from there,
and then you can adjust it.
Refine from there.
Yeah.
So if you had to go back and give your 20-year-old self some advice, what would be some of the advices that you provide your 20-year-old self?
Don't spend money you don't have. That would be the number one thing. Cash flow is always a huge problem, and I think over the years I've learned how to cope with that. But in the beginning, it was a big problem because you kept on thinking, stuff's going to close, money's going to come in, and it's never that easy. So you start having those kind of cash flow issues very early on, and I think that it gets back to the whole thing about how more money has to come in than go out, and you need to make sure that that's the case every single month, rather than starting to get into debt. You start digging a hole, and then you have to get out of it. It's not a good thing to do.
Most certainly. And I know your business is somewhat a distributed workforce. Most of the employees work remotely.
Yeah.
How do you keep everybody accountable, and how do you keep them all engaged when you're not all in one room every day? Yeah,
we're all over the world, actually. You've got people all over the place. My general philosophy with these things is that I'll give someone something to do. I'll give them an idea, and I'll say, look, just come back to me with this. So I am the least hands-on management person you could ever imagine. The people. So I make sure that the people that I hire can go off and do things on their own without bugging me and without me having to be on top of them and all that kind of jazz. And it's worked well. And in those instances, you don't have to worry about every day what people are doing and things like that. So that's worked well.
So you're basically making sure that when you're selecting the people to work with, they better be self-starters, go-getters, and that they don't need a lot of direction and guidance. You don't want to babysit them.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's talking about lessons. That's a big lesson, right? Don't hire people that you need to look after.
Yeah.
That's a nightmare.
And oftentimes, sometimes people say, "Oh yeah, that my boss is a micromanager." Oftentimes, I think they just kind of grew into that role or to that personality style because they worked with a lot of people who are in self-starters, or they just didn't have that kind of the go get it kind of capacity, right? And that led to them having to be overseeing every employee that they have and micromanaging it, which it affects the morale after a while as well.
Right.
So
I was going to say the other thing that I learned also is that you don't say to someone, get this done by the 21st of December. You just say, get this done as fast as possible. Because it gives them incentive to work on it faster. Because if they think that they have to, they've got all the way to December 21st to do it, then they're going to spread it out and all those kinds of things. So that's been, a big thing for me as well.
So just give them the authority and then also responsibility, and then let them make the decisions.
Yeah, let them work as hard. I don't care when people work. They can work on in the evenings. As long as they get something done that they're supposed to get done, it's all good. Do
you have like a business leader or an entrepreneur that you just admire or follow?
Mark Benioff, I guess. Yeah, I mean, Mark is. You couldn't do much better than Mark, right? I mean, I remember I saw him back in 2003, and I thought, wow, is this guy going to make it or not? He's got this revolutionary new idea. And I regret that I never started with him in 2003. It would have been much easier. But yeah, he's managed to do everything right. It's just amazing. So yeah, I mean, I think he's
definitely a visionary leader, and he's also kind of way ahead of his game.
Yeah. Of
most people that you would think about. Like, so I had another person that I was interviewing a few months back, and then that person also said he had an opportunity to go. He exited 2 companies prior to going to sell another company to Salesforce. And he said it was 10 minutes into the conversation, he didn't even take the product out. He just heard the idea and heard what the technology is capable of doing. He said, I wanted to buy it. Customers base, the cost, everything was secondary to him. He knew that the product idea was great, and that's all he cared about. And he said, I wanted to have that. So
that's interesting.
That's just how he thinks.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, like, even now he's on a venture to just get all these analytics products on there. I know he's Datarama. He just acquired a few other data products. So I think that's just where his mind is now. I think he's trying to get into the data business.
Right. That's the other thing he's really good at, is he's really good at identifying where the market's going, and then picking up the companies that have already started and bringing them into the fold. He's really been good at that.
Yeah, I know Tableau and Datarama are the 2 recent acquisitions that I think he made. I know you said you have an upcoming meeting that you're going to, which is like a coach or a mentor that you work with. And business leaders all need that kind of community to kind of pick each other's brain and learn from other people's mistakes and also from their successes. What are some of the things you've seen, at least interfacing with business leaders? What are some of the common mistakes that you see keep happening made by business owners or leaders?
The biggest mistake is running out of money. And I mean, obviously, that's by far the biggest thing. And I've seen some companies that had great technology, like really great technology. There's this one company in particular called Coghead back in 2008, and they had really what Salesforce has become in terms of a platform for development and things like that. And they were about to get more funding in July of 2008. And they said, no, let's wait until December because we'll have a better valuation. But of course, the financial crisis happened. They got no funding. They went out of business. So, just being able to keep up with the amount of money that you need is a critical thing, and I've seen people kind of make those mistakes a lot.
And I also see, like, I think these, especially these startup founders, they just have a crazy mindset of what the company is worth, and oftentimes they put the value that an investor couldn't justify, and then they're just holding on to that value, and they can't find the funding because nobody wants to go buy a company that really doesn't have anything apart from some idea and maybe a set of code.
Right. It's even kind of beyond that. I mean, look at us. We've got our product's been around for 7 years now, and we have a lot of good Fortune 500 companies using it. And even with that, it's very hard to get the right funding. And I've kind of looked at it a few times, and every time I've looked at it, I said, what do I want this for in my life? These guys are going to be on my head. They're going to want to see financials and all the stuff that I hate. So I'm better off kind of doing it on my own. So that's why we never took funding.
But if you figured out how to scale it with the natural growth, and you know how to reinvest into the product and continue to support the customers, oftentimes maybe that modest growth is all you need, because a lot of the companies who are just aggressively want to grow, oftentimes their goal is not to build a product that they just want to exit. They want to make the quick money and then get out of it, go build another product, and oftentimes that's not the best motive that you want to have if you're trying to build a business.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah,
most certainly. So if you had $1 million, how would you invest it today? I know obviously you just said, funding, something that you looked into, but you decided that you didn't need the money, and you're
But someone came along and gave me $1 million, right? So our biggest we're a technology company, and our biggest weakness is sales and marketing. And we haven't spent nearly as much on sales and marketing as we should have. So that's, I'd go out and find the right person to run sales, to hire people, to get more marketing done, that type of thing. Because at the end of the day, when we show the product to people who have expressed interest in it, we typically close the deal because it's a great product. It's a very, very powerful product. Our problem is that nobody knows about it, and that's been our biggest thing, And so, yeah, $1 million would help a lot.
Yeah,
you're offering? I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a common challenge people have because there's that lack of awareness. Because if enough people heard about a specific company or their offerings, then there's enough demand for it, and then that warrants people buying that solution and ultimately helping that company to grow. But I think oftentimes business leaders have that challenge, the predicament of like, hey, is the chicken, which one is it, the chicken or the egg? Do I invest into getting the customer, or do I wait till the customer comes so I can invest into it?
Exactly.
This is where funding is super critical, because if you don't have the actual financials to go and invest the money needed to go scale from a sales and marketing standpoint, then it doesn't matter how amazing the product is, you can't reach the growth curves. So that's definitely a challenge there. So what advice do you have for someone who's aspiring to be an entrepreneur? I know you said, making sure that you have the money, that you know how to read your financials and some of those other things that you've mentioned, or even starting with a product market fit and doing a minimum viable product. But are there any other advice that you have? Someone who's aspiring to probably even start a consulting company or a SaaS product or something of that sort.
Right. So, the first thing you have to realize is it's going to take longer than you think. No matter what you think, it's going to take longer. You have to be prepared for that. And when you're starting out a new company, you got to work very hard, and just to start getting things going. There's always that kind of point in time where you say, am I going to hire people? What kind of people am I going to hire? And that's when things get, more complicated, right? Because now you're dealing with a lot more issues that you have, like payroll and benefits and things like that. And when you start getting into that, then you have a company, but on the other hand, you have a lot of overhead, and you have to make sure that you make even more money now because you have to pay these guys, right? So. Yeah, that's a biggie. So
just really having a roadmap of, hey, here's where I'm trying to get to, and make sure that the timing is realistic, as opposed to like, oh yeah, I can get the product. Like you said, it took you almost 7 years to build a product that's now being used by Fortune 500s, but that just doesn't happen overnight, right? And that's oftentimes what I think the difficulty when you're getting into a business. You're often want the quick wins and the quick success, and the time is the name of the game. Yeah.
Well, if you told me that 7 years ago that it would be 7 years before we really started getting big customers, I'd be like, I'm not doing this. There's no way. So you have to be pretty persistent to keep going. It's like a roller coaster, right? There's a lot of ups and downs. You just have to kind of ride them out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not an easy thing. You've done it as well, so it's not easy.
I think if you look at some of the stories that I've seen too, like even Elon Musk or any of those guys, they had a lot of failures. It took a lot longer than what you see on the paper today or what you see on videos. But there's a lot of sleepless nights and long days.
Right.
To get
it's
to
interesting you say that though. I started building this product actually back in the early 2000s, and we got it pretty far. Spent a lot of money on it. But then we found that the technology had changed, right? All of a sudden, everything was SaaS, and you had to be on the cloud. Start from scratch, right? All over again. And it's that was definitely a failure. But you could. There's certain failures that you could never conceive of, right?
Yeah.
Who knew that
SaaS is such a new concept. It took off. But it was such a new concept. No one could have ever thought about, hey, I have to pay for the software every month.
Right.
I remember early 2000, it was still like, buy a software, you get in a CD, you install it, and you don't have to pay for the license until the computer dies. That was just a concept. I want to say Adobe was kind of the first in getting into that creative cloud space. They were one of the first to actually to pioneer the concept of a SaaS.
Right.
And I'm sure Salesforce was around the same time, or even
Yeah.
So those companies kind of changed the paradigm for how SaaS is, how software is sold.
Right.
And I think I'm starting to hear a new acronym. They call it not SaaS, as in software as a service. They call it success as a service, because that's essentially what these solutions are. They're providing an offering that helps a company succeed with whatever the problem that they're trying to solve.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
That's good. That's really good.
It's a newer concept I've been hearing a little bit about. So I have one parting question.
Sure.
Obviously, we talked about $1 million, how you would invest it in terms of sales and marketing. But what if you had an option to spend an afternoon with Warren Buffett, or you had another $1 million? Which would you choose?
The $1 million.
You think so?
Yeah, because I'm not sure he could help me much, because he's in a different realm altogether.
Mm-hmm.
He's not down in the deep like we are. So hey, I'll take the $1 million.
Sounds good. Well, I appreciate you spending this time with me.
Sure.
And wish you all the best, and look forward to continuing our conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.